So welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in 1 minute. All right. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces today. So on behalf of the Lunar Policy Platform, welcome to this online event towards a shared lunar future, presenting the guide to lunar science and ethics. My name is Antonino Salmeri, and I'm the director of LPP, and I'm going to be your host for this event today. As you've seen already in the flyer that we circulated, our agenda today will foresee a presentation of the guide to lunar science and ethics, preceded by a quick status update on LPP, and then time for discussion and comments with the audience on the document, as well as on future next steps for implementation and discussion. And if you have any question, we certainly encourage you to drop that in the chat, and then later on to take the floor. If you have any difficulty also from a technical viewpoint, just let us know, and our team will be happy to assist you to the extent that we can. And now, without further ado, let's begin. In this presentation, over the next 30 minutes or so, we will be discussing a status update on LPP, going to the document, and then understand what next steps exist and opportunities for collaboration in this very important area of lunar science and ethics. And once again, thank you all for joining us from so many different parts of the world today. So most of you are already familiar with the Lunar Policy Platform, but for those who are not, and for those who will be watching the recording later online, what is LPP? Our vision and mission is to enable a peaceful, prosperous, and collaborative future on the moon through policy. And we fulfill this vision by creating what we call a conducive policy environment that can support peaceful, safe, and sustainable lunar activities. The LPP group is structured with two entities pursuing one vision and one mission. We have a nonprofit entity, which is the entity that is hosting you today, and that produces the reports and the snapshots, as well as the policies and standards that you're familiar with. And then we also have a consulting arm that is dedicated more to support stakeholders with their individual needs and engagements related to lunar policy. So through that entity, we mostly conduct capacity building, training exercises, and we provide specialized advice that are of interest to a specific stakeholder rather than to the general community of all actors. Everything that we do is related to our value proposition. And so some of the main features of LPP have been designed to complement and add value to what already exists in the space community, while also tackling a niche that was not addressed before, which is specific to lunar policy. So our three main addition, let's say, or contribution are, first of all, the revealing of common ground. LPP has a network of over 45 stakeholders all around the world. We consult with the stakeholders directly and individually in a Chatham House informal environment. And then we put together reports that are anonymized, but would also show you what elements actors have in common and what they don't have in common, because sometimes those are the most difficult conversation to have. And once you do them, you can actually start making progress on policy development. This is another contribution that we provide. LPP is not a policy-making body per se. We do not bind or commit any of our stakeholders to what we develop. However, we do develop policies that are adaptive. And so one of the features that we have is to put together documents that can evolve and adapt in time, depending on the evolution of lunar activities. And as I mentioned before, we're also there to provide expert advice through the unique expertise and knowledge that we have at LPP, thanks to the professionals that work with us, and as well as thanks to the engagements that we promote at the policy level. Now, we have 5 distinct features that distinct, let's say, what LPP does. We're an expert-based organization, and I would say we're also a professional organization. So our team is not made of volunteers, it's made of professionals dedicating their time to policy development. We are also an open and neutral entity. We do not have an agenda of our own. LPP conducts consultation with all stakeholders and promotes discussions in a neutral way, taking into account all viewpoints. We are also a global network, as I mentioned before. We work with stakeholders all over the world. And then some of our unique focus is around the practical aspects that we try to address. So LPP is not a speculative or academic institution. There is already plenty of those doing a great job in the lunar side. What we do is address practical questions, things related to the safety and sustainability of lunar activities. But at the same time, we also keep an holistic approach. So we're not an organization that is focused specifically on one issue, such as, for example, space resources or debris. We try to tackle all issues together, or at least to keep a broad view of what the different issues are and how they interact with each other. Here also there is a bit of an update for those of you who are even familiar with LPP. Our team is now grown to 5 people, and I'm excited to welcome today with us Dr. Juliana Rotola, who is supporting also the organization of this event, and so who will be receiving your questions and helping us out today. And also Mr. Harfan Chowdhury, who is a very familiar face for all of you. And thank you both for joining us and being part of this team. We're excited to have you. And perhaps during the discussion, we'd love to hear from you about your new contributions to LPP. So Harfan will be joining us as a policy advisor in a similar capacity that Kevin, for example, is joining us as a strategic advisor. So welcome and thank you for being with us in this journey. Then in terms of our areas of work, our core pillars are, as you know, probably if you already seen our policy plan, related to policy development, policy implementation, and policy education. LPP, in fact, started with policy education, and I think we helped really create and nurture a community of actors interested in policy and lunar policy specifically. Then this year, we dedicated ourselves to policy development with the information sharing and science and ethics. And next year, we're going to start working also on implementation. So we really move around all these 3 pillars, and we consider them to be really complementary with each other. And this is something that also will be addressed later on when we talk about next steps. Now, in terms of our work so far, as you know, in 2023, LPP released a report outlining priorities for safe and sustainable lunar development. And last year, we created another type of new deliverable, which talks about trends and implications on lunar policymaking, our 2024 Lunar Policy Snapshot. Building upon the findings that we discovered during these consultations and in these documents, which you can find online on our website, we decided to focus 2025 on 2 priority areas: information sharing and the Guide to Lunar Science and Ethics. And I would like also to here say a huge thank you to the Open Lunar Foundation, who has been supporting and funding the development of these deliverables in partnership with LPP. You have already heard about Lunar Information Sharing 101. We released the document last month, and now we're going to talk about the Guide to Lunar Science and Ethics. Before I do so, I also wanted to flag with you that we are now already working on plans for 2026. If you're interested in knowing more about it, please let us know. We'd be delighted to share with you our 2026 policy plan, which is still a draft because we welcome all of your comments. And as you see, the document goes around the 3 areas that I've outlined before and suggests topics that we would like to address. So we welcome your feedback, and also we welcome any interest you may have in working with us on any of the 3 areas. Now, like I said, if you don't have the document already, please do send us an email at lpp@lunarpolicyplatform.org. We'll be happy to share with you for discussion. Let's now go into the reason why you're all here, the Guide to Lunar Science and Ethics. Now, as most of you who participate in our consultations are familiar, this document has been developed over a 9-month process. We did about 3 months of initial consultations and then 6 months of review in collaboration with over 39 organizations from all corners of the world. The purpose of the Guide to Lunar Science and Ethics is really to outline the main interests and implications of key scientific interests, cultural interests, and ethical interests in lunar exploration, and then understand what those interests can have as an impact and how they can be impacted by other interests, such as commercial interests, national interests, and try to understand how we can develop principles and policies for a balanced approach. So this document really is the first time that these kind of questions have been mapped for with the perspective of a number of stakeholders in the science, ethical, and cultural communities. We have limited ourselves to these 3 communities because we wanted the document to really speak about science and ethics. But we also recognize that there is many other communities to be engaged, and that's part of our plan for 2026, as we will see later on. So the document goes in great details about all the different scientific interests that you can find in lunar activities. So I'm not going to go into details here, but I think already from this slide, you can see that there is a number of scientific interest in the exploration and use of the moon. Obviously, the most famous and vocal and visible ones around planetary science, planetary geology, as well as radio astronomy. We have eminent representatives here from COSPAR and IAU, which are the symbol organization of these engagements. But there is also much more research that can be done in terms of gravitational physics, human physiology, life science, obviously ISRU, which also has a lot of scientific research behind it, robotics, technical demonstrations, including us testing ground for any activities on Mars. So this is really the first time that we managed to grasp the variety of interest around lunar activities. And I think that's already very valuable contribution for us to understand that science is not a monolith. It's actually very diversified, and there is a number of different scientific interests that can be pursued in the exploration and use of the moon. If we go to the cultural and ethical side, which we group together as they border with each other, let's say, some of the ones that struck the most attention are, for example, concepts such as intergenerational responsibility, the symbolic respect for the moon as let's say, as a significant object that can have different implications for different cultures. The importance of fostering equity and inclusion in lunar exploration. The moon should not become a further element that divides us or that will increase inequalities, but it should become a place that we can all access, because truly, at least from a cultural viewpoint, spiritually, it belongs to all of humanity. There is also a number of other ethical interests in terms of precedent setting, symbolism, and visibility of the moon. Do we want to preserve the current landscape of the moon as it is? Would you be okay with having a brand logo advertising on the moon that you can see from Earth, right? Those kind of questions are not just moot questions, they are real questions, because there are plans to advertise on the moon or to, let's say, alter potentially the visibility and aesthetics of the moon through, for example, large-scale mining operation or other type of transformative activities that will change forever the way we look at the moon. And so all these interests, again, they're not expression of one single view. They are, in fact, born by different communities. And so one of the things that we really appreciated from the conversation around ethics and cultural interest is the diversity of this interest and how they are really relative to a certain way of thinking and a certain way of looking at the world that then impact the way we look at the moon. And I think there is so much more to be discovered, expanding the range of the conversation that we can have on cultural and ethical interest in lunar exploration, but also, of course, beyond that in space in general. Now, if we look at requirements, right, when we interviewed our stakeholders, we asked them to, first of all, formulate the interest that they had in lunar exploration, and then also tell us what do they need for those interests to be protected, and what kind of requirements they would like to see in place to protect those interests. And these requirements go from something as straightforward, quote unquote, as information sharing and data gathering, to the development of specially managed areas on the moon, learning, for example, from the experience of the Antarctic 3D. All the way in between, we can find the importance of conducting environmental assessment, monitoring and potentially remediating any change in the lunar environment, the idea of using safety zones as a way to also preserve those interests, and then some of the concepts that have been brought by our colleagues at COSPAR, IAU, and IAA, and MVA, the idea of sites of special scientific interest and what do they mean for the conduct of other activities and how we can relate with others. I think some of the key and most important conversation that we need to have in this area of requirements or implications is really around the diversity of the approaches that you can have here. You'll see here that some of these requirements are exclusionary in nature, such as specially managed lunar areas, which is an area reserved only for one type of purpose or for one kind of actors. Others try to push for more integration mechanism, whether science and commerce, for example, do not necessarily have to go in conflict with one another, but they can have synergistic interests to be pursued. And then there is also the need for more inclusion in decision-making and in reviewing of plans from communities that are traditionally excluded from these discussions and marginalized. And then the idea of circularity and interoperability as tools that can help us to reduce the potential for conflict and overlap and exclusion and promote a more sustainable and ethically responsible approach. Now, as we usually do at LPP and as part of our value proposition, we always do an analysis of common ground and divergences. And the interesting part is that in this particular consultations, we didn't find a lot of common ground. But the common ground that we found is particularly significant. I think all the stakeholders that we interviewed agreed that the moon has somehow a special value That could be a scientific special value, it could be cultural special value, it could be ethical, it could be religious or spiritual in general. But there is something special about the moon, something that would make us treat it differently than an asteroid, for example, or even the planet Mars. That's something to keep in mind also from a more legalistic perspective when we think about what kind of rules do we want for the moon. Do we want different rules for the moon than we want for Mars or for other celestial bodies? Those are things that we need to keep in mind. If it's true and if we all agree that the moon is a special value, then that might justify rules that we may not need or want to have in other parts of the solar system as we continue to expand our reach. A second element of convergence was around the idea of information sharing and data gathering as key enablers. You cannot coordinate or pay respect to interests that you don't know. And so at this point, we really need to do much better at information sharing and gathering data so that we can then have the contextual information needed to take informed decisions on coordination, collaboration, and cooperation. And that has already been addressed by LPP and the Lunar Information Sharing One-on-One. So I will not go too much into details on this. I would refer you to the document, which in this sense was a very nice complement. As we were proceeding with the consultation, we really saw that the two documents were going hand in hand, as one information sharing really is a key prerequisite for a more effective conversation on science and ethics. And the third element of convergence is really the idea of non-intentional harm, which again is something that we may take for granted, but not necessarily. The idea that, yes, unintentionally, it can happen that we're going to create issues to each other or to the lunar environment, but never, ever this should be done intentionally. And so that requires more intentional and ethical approach towards how we plan lunar activities. How do we account for consequences of our behavior, and how far are we willing to go to conduct our activity if it's causing harm to others? And if we are aware of it, then where do we draw the line from intentionality and unintentionality? And I think that's another element that will need a lot of further discussion. If we move to divergence, that's much more interesting, if I can say, and also much more extensive in terms of the idea of how do we preserve the interests that we have on the moon. And we were discussing this just yesterday in the group of friends for sites of special scientific interest, whether even the word preservation or protection is the word that we're looking for. Maybe we'll look for other words such as management or other type of more neutral terminology that does not necessarily give priority. But not everybody agree on that. So the idea really of how do we protect interests between exclusivity and integration is a point that will need to be further discussed more, especially I would say in the science community. Some type of science are not really bound to the concept of exclusivity. They don't need it. Some others, they feel that they need that. And so how do we reconcile that and come to a unified position on behalf of science is an essential question that I think would need to be answered in the next couple of months or years before we can come to development of policies and standards. The other question that was not clear and that got a diversity of responses is where do we draw the line between, in the early stages, between what we find to be acceptable and what we find to be unacceptable. Noting that lunar activities are in a very pioneering stage, it's very expensive to even go to the moon. To add additional requirements to preserve certain interests, it may become unbearable for certain operators, or at least that's what we hear as a feedback. It's also that we don't really know what's going to happen. And so how proactive should we be in imagining the consequences of our activities? Another area is who can speak for science and ethics. Are those even unified categories and communities that can speak with one voice? Or we will end up with different positions within these communities? And then how do we balance these different positions and voices? Other question that divided the community concerned data management and data sharing. Again, this could border into sensitive commercial information, but it's also just more a question of how do we really store this data and who can access it and why. Other more substantial topic that sparked a lot of debate were burial and human remains. Do we allow private actors to send their human remains for profit on the moon and make it as a business? How okay are we with alteration of the moon from a visual perspective, noting that everything that happens on the moon will change it forever because there is little to non-geological activity. And so everything that we do is going to have a permanent mark on the lunar surface. And so this could be an argument both in favor and against any type of alteral change. And then finally, do we need a treaty today to regulate these aspects, or can we go on for a while with voluntary norms and voluntary practices? In front of all this, at the LPP, we were a bit overwhelmed by the level of depth of the analysis that we got. And we felt that we really need more time and conversation to come to principles and practices that can be applied concretely on the moon to these activities. And so what we did was take a step back and see what can be useful to enable a further conversation in a more focused manner, and also allow us to conduct activities in the early stages in a way that is not uh, creating irreversible damage to others. And so you'll see on the left and in the document that we, based on the consultation, came up with 3 principles for, let's say, avoiding that there is any immediate conflict. And one is proactiveness, right? We really do need to think about what our activities will do on the moon. A second aspect is good faith. If there is a conversation about the need to protect a certain interest or the need to be particularly careful in an area, those conversations should be had in good faith, which is also a long-standing principle of international law. And then proportionality. We need to understand that there's going to be a balance between different interests. And so when we look for requirements or when we look for a compromise, it needs to be proportional to the interests at stake on every possible area of those interests. In terms of procedures, things that can help moving forward the conversation, like I said before, streamlined information sharing is going to be essential. If we don't know the interest, if we don't know the missions, if we don't know the consequences, because we're not sharing information, or because we are sharing, but we don't know how to read or understand or find the information, then none of this will actually be possible. We also need more structured consultations, and ATLAC is going to work on that, the action team on lunar activities consultations. And then maybe we need to start doing some mission impact assessment on just even understanding what the impact will be, not necessarily taking any measure to counter this impact. But again, it starts with awareness and starts with understanding. And especially while we are on the lunar surface, there is so much that we can learn. And so using that time to get some more knowledge will be extremely important. Now, in the next 5 minutes, I want to go into next steps for this area of work for us at LPP and opportunities for collaboration before we open the floor for questions. Now, very quickly, in terms of next steps, we're currently distributing the document in September. We would like to now start planning implementation activities between October and December. And we would like to start with the implementation of the Guide to Lunar Science and Ethics already in 2026. As I mentioned before, implementation is going to be new for us at LPP, but also new for the lunar community. We have never went into the implementation of policies, and so that's going to be a process that we're going to shape and work on together. Just more concretely, in terms of distribution, you can find the document on the website of LPP. We're also going to email it to you if you're part of our distribution list. And if you're going to meet with us, you'll probably see us with a physical copy of the document. We're also going to bring the document with us at some events. If you're going to be at IAC in Sydney, I will have some physical copies for you. We are also going to have an event at the COSPAR 2025 Symposium in Nicosia. Together with COSPAR and IAU, we're going to present the event and then discuss a collaboration that COSPAR and IAU and LPP recently started on fostering principles and practices on lunar science and ethics. And then we're also going to be present at relevant UN events. So the Commercial Lunar Conference that UNUSA is organizing in November, the Spacewalk Conference that will follow it, as well as, of course, the COPWEST cycle in 2026, especially in light of LPP status as observer to the work of the committee. In terms of what are we actually going to do for implementation, you can find in these slides, as well as in our policy plan, some initial ideas, but we really welcome any feedback and comments you have, especially on areas that you also were thinking to address and that maybe we can synergize and address together. So what we would like to do is to start doing some case studies to bring the general concepts and discussions from the guide to the concrete elements of operations, and also to expand the range of voices. So for example, one case study we would really like to do next year is on the perspective of indigenous communities. Over the past 3 years, we've been hearing a lot about the need to bring indigenous voices into this conversation, but nobody has really done it in a structured way. And we think the time is really running up for them to be meaningfully involved. We can always reach out to them in 10 years when everything will already be done. But what kind of meaning will it have? Now is really the time to do that. So for us, this is something that we consider to be a priority. We also would like to continue work with our science partners to help them reconcile the diversity of views that they have in the scientific community, and then translate those views into actual policy requirements that can be presented then at the national, international, and multilateral levels. We also would like to talk with the industry and present them with the guide and see what their reactions are, and do a case study on what the industry is willing to accept and do in the name of protecting and preserving science and ethics. And then we will do that through case studies, and then we would like to convene some closed-door, intimate workshop where we bring together the communities addressed in the case studies, and we try to move forward with some concrete measures and principles for implementation. Now, what can you do in all of this? You can tell us whether you want to participate. If you're part of any of the groups that you see targeted here, you can partner with us on the organization of these activities, or you can fund it. Like I mentioned before, for example, the Guide to Lunar Science and Ethics was developed thanks to the funding provided by Open Lunar Foundation, so that at LPP we can hire professionals that can work on these documents with the care and attention and expertise that these topics deserve, beyond, of course, the very important contribution of voluntary entities and associations. And then final, in terms of timeline and actual concrete deliverables, we're looking to do 1 or 2 case studies and workshops, so covering up to 2 topics, just not to stretch ourselves too thin. We will certainly be present at COPUOS, and we will be working with the events that I mentioned before. The timeline would be to do the case studies between Q1 and Q2 of next year, do the workshops to validate and discuss the case studies in Q3, and then towards the end of the year, as we're doing right now, release the documents for the public. As you know, everything that LPP does is not for profit in our nonprofit entity, and all our documents are publicly accessible in perpetuity for everyone to use and employ in whatever manner they see fit. I also want to take a moment here to announce our first partnership, which is already from a few months ago, and thank COSPA and IAU for being a partner with us on science and ethics. We signed a multi-year MOU, and we're gonna, start working on concrete ideas also around potentially the Guide to Lunar Science and Ethics on how do we want to move forward together on a balanced approach to lunar activities. If you're interested, like I mentioned before, now is the time to say so. Of course, we welcome any statement you would like to make at this event. You can also contact us at lpp@lunarpolicyplatform.org. We would like to use November and December to tailor our partnerships so that we are ready to start with the work in 2026. If that timeline doesn't work for you, but you're still interested, please let us know. We can always try and be flexible to the extent that we can, because we would really like to involve a number of different actors and partners. And we understand that everyone has different timelines and priorities and resources. And so all of this conversation would be really tailored to what you're interested in and what you can bring to the table as an organization. And with that, I would like to remind you that the document is going to be available online on our website, which is very simple, lunarpolicyplatform.org/science. We're going to be uploading it as this meeting will be over. Also, the recording of this meeting will be posted on YouTube, and so you'll be able to rewatch it. And also, if you can and want to, please distribute it to your network so that we can reach a maximum number of actors. And I think with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. This is also my personal contact if you'd like to get in touch with me directly later on. And now I would like to open it up for questions. And Julie, I don't know, I saw the chat popping up here every now and then. I don't know if there was already any questions there. If you would like to take the floor, please just raise your hand so that we can give an order, and then we'll get into it. So any feedback and comment, welcome from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonino. And I don't see any question in the chat. It's mostly question on the distribution of the document and the slides. So you already answered the question regarding the document. I don't know if you will also upload the slides maybe on the website.
We can also do that, yeah.
The YouTube recording.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Yes, thank you, Julie. And I see already 3 hands from Jean-Claude, then Richard, and then Pascal. First, thank you to the 3 of you for being with us today. I think this is the order that I saw them. So let's go with Jean-Claude, then Richard, then Pascal.
Thank you, Antonino. And hello, everyone. Very interesting presentation. Thanks for that. We've been following this, the genesis of this project with interest. And as you mentioned, we are partnering on some of these issues. So again, congratulations. What I found very interesting amongst this very broad set of findings and outcome is the fact that although, and you mentioned it, there are a very large number of divergence on some of the aspects linked to lunar exploration and use by many different actors. There are also common grounds, and the most interesting part of that is that, for instance, a set of guidelines for some kind of interoperability of let's call it operations on the lunar surface and on the moon is actually advocated by most actors. And of course, with understandably, with different priorities, industry, policymakers, scientists would not want to do the same thing first. But they all agree that some form of operational set of guidelines is required. And so this is very important because, of course, as you mentioned at the beginning, we should start with what is common to all to try to make some kind of progress. So that's the first comment I wanted to make. The second comment is linked to what you mentioned at the beginning regarding safety zones. And I just want to make sure that people do not think that we are mixing that up with what we have called, as you mentioned, SSSI, Lunar Sites of Special Scientific Interest. And the reason for that is we discover very quickly that if we want to tell people that we will reserve areas for science ad vitam aeternam, if you want, that we would display a very hands-off attitude by saying, you know, this PSR, this permanently shadowed region, this latitude, this area in a crater, the far side, etc., you are simply not allowed to go there for generations. It will certainly not work. So this is not the attitude that is displayed by the people and the organization that are supporting SSSI. I am not saying that the whole scientific community agrees with that. There are dissenting voices there as well. But there is the notion that the lunar sites of special scientific interest should be designated in a form that is agreed by all, in a way that it doesn't make it exclusive, as you also mentioned. Meaning that, for instance, we will say, in this area, we need to do this type of study for a certain amount of time. And then people with different objectives and different ambitions might be able to use it or exploit it for other reasons. So safety zones, I mean, SSSIs are not safety zones in a sense that maybe the Artemis Accords are bringing to these words. You mentioned the group of friends. This is in the making for Lunar Science Special Scientific Interest. Richard, a number of other people know about that. We had a second meeting yesterday. You're all welcome to attend. We will make sure that this is known to everybody, that the next meetings will be made visible so that you can participate. It's a very informal group. The idea is really here to broaden participation to this discussion, including, and I should say most importantly, at the level of UN member states. And so that's what I wanted to say. We are aiming to have an international workshop on lunar sites of special scientific interest in the spring next year. So I hope that the LPP will be able to work with us on that as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jean-Claude. Very quick response because I see a number of hands. Thank you so much for your kind comments on the document and also for being a wonderful partner to us, as you mentioned, since the very beginning and hopefully in the future. So also starting with the last one, we will certainly be happy to participate and contribute to the workshop that you're planning to organize on SSSI, which I think it's an excellent initiative to try and bring together the science community around some more commonalities. Same for the group of friends. We were there yesterday, also the first meeting, and will be continue to be there and supporting, at least monitoring those discussions. Differentiation between the SSSIs and other tools. I hope that the document reflects that well. The idea is really that there is a number of approaches. So I think what you were describing is something that is referred to by many as specially managed lunar areas, which is really the concept of excluding someone that does not fit a certain purpose for the management of the area. I will say in the defense of safety zones of the Artemis Accords that they are not meant to be a keep-out zone, at least not in the intention of the drafters of the Artemis Accords. Then there is views. I know that Kevin is here with us. Maybe he can say something even informally about it, but I know that safety zones are not necessarily intended to be keep-out zones. Maybe someone can construct them as such. But in that sense, they also a further different element from the SSSI, and thank you also for shedding some light on it. And finally, on interoperability, completely agree with you. that's certainly a topic that everybody wants to address, because through interoperability, we can make each other better, we can be more successful, and we can avoid interference, which is essentially a bonus for everybody under so many aspects. So also looking forward to seeing further work evolving there in other forums that are addressing it. And with that, Richard, please kick us off with your comments.
Thanks. And I apologize, this is mighty high level and somewhat ill-formed, but I'm wondering for our next steps what we want to concentrate on. And I frame that because of the article in the newspaper yesterday that knocked me back, that revealed that there is a multi-tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars euro contract in place for the delivery of lunar helium-3 by 2030. So the company is ready to go and start churning regolith and choosing their spot and moving forward. So to me, that illustrates the other aspect of the Artemis Accords, for example, which is first mover advantage. Whoever gets there, claims the resource, makes money on it, and extracts it from the moon. That kind of ethical platform is so different from what you've addressed in this interesting document. I'm wondering, do we start by trying to develop a set of ethical principles for science, merging your title and making sure that we have a sort of unified approach to doing science on the moon, designating the special areas for science before we try to convince the whole lunar world that they should leave room for developing nations and all the other great principles of the Outer Space Treaty that they're putting to lower priority. So, philosophical question, I apologize, but it's getting serious and fast.
No, thanks so much, Richard, for your comment. And that's something that I believe we should be discussing, all of us, more in detail. I don't know if we have the time today, but as I was mentioning as well, activities are happening on the moon. Obviously, we are all aware of Interloon's plan to go. It started with the Department of Energy, and now you see that there is also private actors that want to purchase helium-3. We used to think it's fictional. It still needs to be demonstrated, but the plans are there, and they could be quite massive, as you said. So certainly the time is going to become of the essence very soon. I already told you in private, and I will repeat it here, I certainly think that there is value for the science community to start getting back behind some fundamental principles and practices. So I think that's a great starting point. We cannot convince everybody immediately, but if at least the science community can present a more unified front also on ethical principles, I think that's going to be beneficial, if not to everybody, at least to the science community itself, so that you can at least try to advocate for what it needs in a way that is also, again, measured and realistic. So thank you so much for that, Richard, and obviously more to come and discuss in the coming months and years. Pascal, please, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I looked at the list of attendees here, and I don't know all of them. So I'm Pascal Ehrenfreund. I'm a planetary scientist. I'm also the current president of the Committee on Space Research, COSPAR. So I also want to thank you for this incredible output, which comes so every month, another document. Yeah. For LPP, it's very hard to keep up with that. It's quite impressive. And thank you very much for your presentation. So I'm coming to one point, which is, I think, a little bit central. You had on one of your slides, no intentional harm. And you also mentioned that you think that this is a given, yeah, so that nobody really tries. So the problem is that we have not a common definition for harmful contamination. And as long as this is not really existing, it is very, very difficult, to hold companies or other people accountable. And I think it is really, really crucial that we involve also in the future in this environmental assessment and understanding, what we are actually doing during operations on the moon, that we involve much more scientists which are really specialized, which might not be, a part of this policy world. We are all, let's say, half, or at least for me, I do understand the policy. I do understand the importance of the policy. But people which have really this incredible knowledge about, the elemental composition of the regolith, what's going to happen if a spacecraft actually lands with this and this speed in that and that area. These are people which might not be, with us right now, not reading those kind of documents. And I think it's really important, and I think probably COSPA can help to reach out, for instance, to the League, which has done a lot of documents, the Lunar Exploration Group in the US, which has a lot of engineers and scientists. And there is a really, really important NASA report about, which really gives a good overview about what we actually do when we are operating on the moon, and what are the hazards, and what do we have to be careful. So I'm really thinking, I'm coming from the point of science, which we have to introduce, that we understand what we are actually doing on the moon in order to be able to convince other people not to do intentional harm. Thanks.
Excellent points, Pascal. Thank you so much. I think you're touching a very important element here, which is definitional aspect, which comes very often into what do we mean by harm? What's the meaning of harm contamination? And I think there could be many different understandings of it. So in the document, you will see that the agreement is that we should do not have intentional harm, but whatever that harm means, it's not in the document, right? So that's the next step into like, what do we mean by harming others? And if we can have a more objective definition of harm that at least is grounded in science and understanding of the engineering and how it works on the moon, that's going to be essential to convince also the others that this is not just, a philosophical point, but it actually has some ground in science and engineering. So one of the reason why we write these documents with a plain language is so that they can be read also by non-policy experts. So we hope that a document like this can be helpful to a scientist in understanding what this is the problem from a policy perspective, and then we can find a way to bring them into these conversations, and we can help function as a translator, because I understand that if you're an expert in science and engineering, you don't necessarily know or care or skilled in policy, and that's where I think our collaboration with COSPAR and scientific institution can be really fruitful, because you have these people in your network, you know where to find them, and we can do an event where we listen to them, we make them aware of the policy aspects, and then we can get their knowledge to inform policy discussion. So I think that's certainly something that we should start getting to do pretty fast. And so maybe even at the 2025 COSPAR Symposium, there could be an opportunity for us to sit down with some of these scientists, because as Richard was saying, time is really running up, and we need to certainly start getting a better understanding before irreversible harm is made. And I believe you were referring to the NASA Lunar Landing and Policy Analysis, which was authored by Gabriel Sweeney, which is also an excellent document that I would recommend to colleagues interested in knowing more, especially also on safety zones, to learn what the NASA at least thinking was a few years ago on this. Thank you so much, Pascal. And looking forward to more discussions. David, please. Thank you for being with us.
Hello, everybody, and congratulations, Antonino, on the effort and the document. It was timely before, and every day goes by, it becomes more timely with the press of events. I am curious, several weeks ago, the NASA administrator announced in the press conference to place a nuclear reactor on the lunar surface. In his remarks that, I'm paraphrasing, we're going to the moon to claim it for ourselves and our partners. I'm curious if LPP views that those comments were not captured in the directive on the reactor itself. They were just made at the press conference. So trying to decipher what they mean, does LPP believe it to be a change in US policy? And if so, how is that going to impact things? Of course, for space lawyers, it's a very interesting topic in view of the Outer Space Treaty. So it will be a very interesting conversation at the Lunar Conference at the UN. But do you have any thoughts on that, please?
Thank you, David, for the very easy question. And I will say that I think, as you already mentioned before, one thing is policy and another thing is rhetorics and politics, right? There is a subtle difference, but it is there. Now, if I look at the policy of the United States, I find it in documents such as executive orders or such as the policy analysis that was published by NASA. And there I see and I read also in corporate statements full respect for the principles of the Outer Space Treaty, which clearly established that no one claims territory on the moon, no one goes there to exclude the others. I think this has been foundational to the involvement of the United States in space as such, and I would not imagine that this will change soon. That at the same time, we also need to be mindful of the language of certain political parties, especially what's going on in the Trump administration. And there is a lot of language related to adversarial concepts, such as like, we are going to go so that others, our enemies, are not going, or that we will be in a better position. So far, I haven't seen those comments being translated into actual policy changes. If they would, then that would raise a serious red flag, not just for LPP, because nobody cares, obviously, but in other countries that then would look at this as a fundamental change that could really, in a domino effect, really compromise the peace, safety, and sustainability of space. So I do hope and still believe it was more like a hot comment from someone that comes from also another background. It's not really familiar with Outer Space Treaty. It just said it because politically they have this view, but whether it will be translated, I haven't seen it translated. And I hope, the White House will be well advised by State Department, NASA colleagues that know very well how much it is important for the US in their own interest to stick to what we have in the Outer Space Treaty. Then whether this will happen or not, it's obviously for other actors to comment. And I hope, honestly, that also in the US, there will be discussions around these topics to avoid that the wrong impression is given to allies and other countries, because this is also, again, in the national interest of the country itself. But just a final note on this, lunar nuclear reactors will become a quite divisive element if they're not approached in a more collaborative and transparent way. And so that's one of the reasons why in our policy plan for 2026, you will see that we're hopefully going to have consultations on this topic to kind of, avoid these misunderstandings and find common ground beyond, let's say, the political narratives, more on the policy side. I hope that answers your question. We can discuss more over beers next time I'm in Vienna in just a few months.
Yes, thank you very much. Look forward to it.
Thanks, David. And I'll go to Arfan, and again, our newly recently joining us policy advisor. Thank you for being with us, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Antonino. Can I just first of all say thank you very much? And I'm delighted to be joining the Lunar Policy Platform team, particularly joining Antonino, who I've known for several years, specifically through the SGAC work. So thank you very much for that. But also Sam, old friend Kevin, who I know very well from his NOAA days, and also Juliana as well. I look forward to working with you. I have a couple of comments and questions, if I may, in the context of the questions that have already been raised. One is effectively a comment. Given my previous role at UK Space Agency, leading on the kind of negotiations for the Artemis Accords when we were setting those up, working alongside some of our European partners, including Japan and Luxembourg, Italy, and others, we talked about specific issues and working closely with Gabriel Sweeney, as he then was at the legal side from NASA. The issue of safety zones was a significant discussion that took place as we were finalizing the language. And it certainly was not intended, and the language hopefully reflects that, to be seen as a keep out zone. It was really about the actual safety considerations, the aspects of that. Perhaps that's something we can explore further in our engagement. But then we also need to consider the work that's being done by the Chinese National Space Agency, ILRS, and the sort of competing, if not conflicting, elements of both Artemis Accords and ILRS, and how they can work and combine together. And again, the earlier point I think was made by Jean-Claude, there are more areas of commonality than there are areas of division, and I think those are important for us. On the issue of scientific ethical principles, I think it's right that we talk about it from an academic perspective, but the reality is that we need to have that realistic engagement with both industry and with governments and national space agencies on the practical aspects and the steps of that. To do it from a purely scientific perspective is, I wouldn't say naive, but it's slightly idealistic. And I think we need to consider the practical aspects of that and how the implementation was to be undertaken. Does that sort of clear up or give you my perspective, Antonino?
Yes, Arfan, and as always, it's very much on point and illuminating in a certain extent. So Thank you for your comments on the safety zone aspect. I think that's the same thing that I learned when I was discussing with different colleagues, negotiating the text of the Artemis Accords, and also we read it, as I mentioned before, in the lunar landing and policy analysis. So really appreciate your insight from the inside on this topic. And again, then it's one thing what we try to say, and then one other thing what the others understand. It's always important to reiterate that concept. In terms of bringing together Artemis and ILRS, I think that's obviously one of the other points that is of particular sensitivity, and certain declaration like Sean Duffy do not help in that sense. When you have this kind of narrative about a race or a narrative about we have to be first so that we will do this and that. The problem is if you end up being second for some reason, then you're creating a huge problem to yourself. And we don't know who's going to be first, but so we know that the Chinese are already on the moon and they're doing wonderful things. So I would rather try to partner with them, but that's just my own views of things. And like I said, from LPP, we don't take any sides. We just try to forward this kind of inclusive conversation. And then the practical aspects that you were mentioning before, that's something that I fully agree with you. There is, like I mentioned before, like the idea of what we would like to achieve, that will be the perfect scenario for science and ethics. And then there is the need to measure that with what the others want to do in a proportionate manner. So my hope really is that the three principles that we outline in the guide, the idea of proactiveness, proportionality, and good faith, they work together to come to a sensible solution. If you take out one of them, then it's going to be something slightly unbalanced or slightly ineffective. And so that's what we're trying to foster next year with the case studies. And I really invite anybody who is interested in working with us to really translate these principles, these ideas into a concrete operational scenario where we finally start to understand if this is acceptable and workable or not. And the answer may be different than what we think and what we hope. But like I said, with a good faith approach and with structured processes to consult with each other, then we can find a way to address them. And time is also running up, so we need to start getting more effective and involved in this conversation. So thank you so much, Irfan, for these comments. I think very valuable addition to our discussion. We have almost reached the end of our time. I would like to thank all of you for being with us today, for the very lively discussion in the chat, as well as in the live interaction. Thanks to all of the great colleagues that have intervened. And thanks for all of you who have been watching this live today, as well as will watch later on YouTube. From the LPP side, we consider this as one of the priority topics that we want to continue to address in the next months and years. So we'd certainly welcome all of you to please read the Guide to Lunar Science and Ethics. Let us know what your feedback on the document is, and mostly let us know what we can do together to work in the implementation phase. We have a policy plan currently being distributed. That could be also a good reference for you. If you want it, please let us know. We'll send it to you. And overall, I think we're still on time to make this whole lunar thing work, if you want. We do have time, but we need to start getting action. And so time will not be there with us forever. It's a commodity we should be leveraging as much as we can. And I think I don't want to bring everybody over time. I do see maybe more comments in the chat related to David comment related to the administrator. But I think it could be a good aspect for further discussion later on. So I think if there is no burning question that we can address in 1 minute, then I would like to send everybody back to their working day.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Antonino.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Antonino.
Thank you very
everyone.
much. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you so much,
Bye-bye.
Antonino.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. And we'll be closing this meeting now.